All right, let's power this amp on. I'm not going to use a standby switch. It's in play. While the standby switch in this amp is less likely to damage it than the one in the Morgan because of that film cap, it's not necessary. Let me demonstrate. Let me get the chassis here. And right here, I don't know if you can't see what I'm doing. I'm touching pin 8 of the rectifier. And with the amp powered off, I've got 1.9 volts DC there, which means that there's 1.9 volts DC being stored in the filter caps. We turn the amp on and measure that DC as it climbs. All right, it starts. Is it 1.9 because the rectifier hasn't warmed up? It's climbing up to 2, 3, 5, 15, 20, 30, 100 something, 200 something, 300 something. Slowing down as the caps charge up. It's in the 380s right now, and it has gone up to 382-ish. Now we're going to let that sit for a minute and stabilize. Let the output tubes draw their current, and it comes to an operating point. And this is with 123 volts coming out of the wall right now in Memphis, Tennessee in March. April. It's April now. Sorry. April Fools. It's April. All right, now that's rested a little bit. 381 is the loaded B plus of this amp. So that's well below the 450 volts rating of these capacitors. Take a note, Morgan. No need to use standby. Cathode stripping is a myth. Doesn't apply to the kinds of tubes we use in guitar amps. If you're operating a radio station in 1937, it's a real thing. It won't be a factor here. The only thing you have to worry about as far as standby goes in amplifiers is typically if the unloaded B plus were to exceed the rating of the capacitors. There's nowhere, we're not even close to it here, not a concern. So what I want to do next is I want to measure the cathode voltage. So I've measured the bias, and with a 270 ohm resistor there for the bias. It may look like I'm about to touch things in the amp. There's more distance than the camera may show. 270 ohm resistor there. We've got a cathode voltage of 28.46, and the plate voltage, plate to cathode, is 336, which gives us a measurement of 17.71 watts. However, you subtract about 5% of that to give you, take out the screen current. It means that these tubes are idling with these EL34s at about 16.82 watts. An EL34 is a 25 watt amp. Let me do the math real fast and tell you what that comes out to. All right, these tubes, these EL34s, are idling at about 67% dissipation. And that sounds great, except that's really cold for a cathode biased amp. And I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole. You really want them with the EL34s or 6L6s in a cathode biased amp to be closer to 90% dissipation. It means that when the tube swings in operation, it's not going to go into a cold clipping range of the operation. It just minimizes crossover distortion. But I imagine that this amp's fairly on the clean side of things as such things are measured. Now, I don't mean that this thing won't have overdrive. It should have a great overdrive, but I think we'll probably be okay. I think for better tone, that 270 ohm could come down in value. But I would have to measure this with 6L6s and 6V6s. This may be the compromise that allows all three sets to have a functional operational range, even though the amp may sound its best with a particular tube type. Say that 6V6s are idling at 95%, 6L6s at 80%, and 34s at 67%. That's a for instance. I don't have the other tubes in place. I'm not going to do that. This may be the compromise to allow different tube types. It doesn't mean that the amp's going to be operating at its best with any one particular tube type, or it may be ideal with 6V6s and the other two are compromises. That gets into the realm of the subjective. All right, I've got this running through its Celestion G12H30. I've got an SM57 on that just at the edge of the dust cap and the cone, midway through, straight on axis to the speaker, my standard miking setup. There's so many variables involved with miking, but that gives a consistent result from speaker to speaker and amp to amp. Let's hear this thing. So the first thing I notice I'm going to turn the standby off and let you hear it. The output has got a hum. It's not terrible, but it's not ideal. That could be a preamp tube. That could be mismatched output tubes. My money's initially going to be on one of those tongue saw preamp tubes. I'll investigate that in a moment. I've got it connected to the 8-ohm tap. I tried to look up this output transformer. It's a Habor. It is a Habor HTS 8685. And I could not find any documentation on Habor's site or Mojotone's site. It looks to be pretty much like a Vibrolux reverb output transformer. So I would suspect that it will probably be optimized for 6L6 use rather than the 34s or the 6V6. So if you have one of these, something to play around with, see how you like the feel. Won't hurt anything. But if it had a 16-ohm tap, I think a 16-ohm tap with an 8-ohm load might be a better option for the 6V6s or the 34s. I don't think the 4-ohm tap is that useful unless you're using 2 speakers. So I've got it set to 8 ohms, 8 ohms. All right, we'll turn the gain up to good, loud, clean. Now that hum is just the proximity of my guitar to the transformers. And I can rotate and make it better or worse. Just live with it for this video. If I were to be playing 6 to 10 feet from the amp, you would not hear it. Sounds pretty good. A note, I had initially, earlier in the video, said it looked like 0 dB and maybe -10. It's actually, I was thrown off by the Art Deco logo font. That's high, that's low, though. You know, trust me, that's high, that's low. Sometimes fonts get in the way of legibility. All right, before we do anything else, let's see how the fat and bright switches off work on this. So we've had it normal, bright, that's nice. It's subtle. It's not a, hey, and now everything's going to make your feelings fall out setting. It's just a nice little bit of control. That's good. Let's see how the fat does. That's quite the thing. Sounds pretty good, damn good. I sure would make that foot switchable. All right, let's put it back in standard mode because I'm not here to show everything the amp can do. Just make sure it sounds good. Let's see how the tone stack responds. I think that might be an audio taper pot. I think the midway point as far as neutral is here about 2 o'clock. Above which it gets much brighter. But immediately below 2 o'clock it gets quite a bit darker. So I have not measured the taper, but I suspect that's a linear taper. I'm sorry, an audio taper pot. Linear would have this sound about here, and a J taper would have that sound about here. It doesn't hurt anything, it just means that you've got a smaller range of control for the brighter stuff. Now let's see how that works with the cut circuit. So brightest, darker. Let's leave that about there for now. And let's see if that bright switch becomes painful here. No, that's still a very nice bright switch. All right, let's see how the mids react. I'm gonna go to the humbucker for that. Good punchy upper mids. Let's see how that sounds on a Strat neck pickup. It's a pretty nice range. One of the more subtle mid controls, but it works well. Let's see how the bass does. Good range of control on that. You're not going to get a huge amount of low-end response out of a open-back 1x12 with a G12H30, but over the response the cab and speaker have, that's nice. Let's see how the master volume holds up at lower volumes. Pretty steep drop off there. That's okay. It's not the best. It's a pre-phase inverter master volume, and in a cathode biased amp with no negative feedback, I think that's a shame. I think from a design perspective, when you use the pre-phase inverter, you're losing the output effects of a driven phase inverter. Let me demonstrate. So let's go higher on the gain. With the master up on all the way, let me check my meter as I do this. Then I turn the master down. You just lose that snarl as it goes below a certain point. Let's turn it up until we get that snarl back. So pretty much where it's almost transparent is from 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock, and then it begins to lose gain because you're not getting the output tube and phase inverter in the mix of adding distortion. Now this amp gets a little bit crunchy at the higher gain stuff. Let me turn the treble down just slightly. Let me show you how to tame that. So this is a bridge humbucker. It's a little bit of a crispness. Turn the cut up. So, aside from the standby wiring and the mains safety ground wiring, this amp is otherwise quite excellent. From a design perspective, I disagree with the value used on the treble pot. I like to have that sound be here. That gives you a wider range of control for the brighter stuff because you have a narrower window here. It goes too bright, right? And here's where your sweet spot is. And I think that at this price point, the amp would sound a lot better with a post-phase inverter master volume, so you would keep the phase inverter tube clipping that this amp wants to do. That's why that cut control is there, to give you control over how much of that crispness you get. I think the fat boost is really great. I don't believe it's foot switchable. Let me triple check that. I don't think I saw a jack for that. No. Personally, I think that sounds good enough and is just enough louder than the non-boosted that make a great option for a foot switch. I would much rather have that foot switchable than have a useless standby switch on this amp. I would go so far as to say, if you owned one of these and you wanted that foot switched, I would say you're never going to use the low gain input jack. Only make that a foot switch for that. But that is in the realm of modification and customization. You know, I'm not nitpicking to find fault. I'm not desperate to find something that's not right about this amp. It's so close to being really amazing. And I think the master volume is a serious ding. I think the treble taper makes it less than stellar. I mean, it's really, really damn good, but that's not really the nicest place from a player's perspective. And their boost circuit sounds good enough that I think it'd be really nice if it were remotely foot switchable. So that's more of a suggestion. I was curious because I hadn't paid attention to it earlier. Or what they're doing with that bright versus boost switch is offering a choice of cathode bypass caps for a gain stage. And so in bright, you've got this small cap. Was it a 47 microfarad? Oh, sorry, 47 nanofarad? Yeah, 47 nanofarad. So that boosts the upper mids and bright frequencies. And then you've got this 22, I think, let's see. Yeah, 25 microfarad that does a full frequency boost. That's when you get a lot more gain across the entire spectrum. And that would be fairly easy to make foot switchable. Other than that, this thing sounds great. In fact, to make it foot switchable, all you do is remove the two resistors from this jack, move one of the resistors just to the connection on this jack. You can change it from a 68 to 34 if you want to keep that the same. And then you'd have the connections on this jack, which would just go from here to here, just two wires. And then you'd have a foot switchable boost. You'd have to make sure that this is not shunting to ground. You would not use the shunt tip, you just use the tip in the sleeve. So it'd be a very easy modification to make. Hint, hint, if anyone out there sees this video and has thought about doing that, and it could easily be put back to stock. That's, you know, I'm really not criticizing this amp in any way. I'm glad this amp came in just in time for my 10K subscribers video, because I can finally say a lot of really good things without a lot of reservations. And I'm going to change the wiring on that fuse holder and then get this back to the shop and tell my client that I absolutely think this is a great amp for him to buy, no downside whatsoever. Oh, and P.S., I was right about the taper on this treble pot. It's a 250K audio taper. That should be either a J taper or a linear taper to get a better sweet spot on the knob. Sorry, I can't help being right sometimes.